In this video, Jeff Nippard and I will give you a detailed guide for exactly how to build your first 5 kilograms of muscle. You will learn what makes muscle grow, how to set up your own training program, and most importantly, what habits you should develop early on to help you easily reach and even surpass the intermediate stage. Let's go! Contrary to what many people believe, muscle doesn't grow because damaged muscle fibers are rebuilt bigger after training. It also doesn't grow because of the pumps and burns you get from lifting light weights. It doesn't grow because of soreness, and it definitely doesn't grow because of the so-called muscle confusion, or surprising your body with a new workout every week. These things can play some role in muscle growth, but the primary initiator of growth is without question mechanical tension. Virtually all training-related muscle growth occurs as a result of placing muscle fibers under high levels of tension. When you lift weights, muscle fibers are stretched and pulled under resistance. This is what we mean by mechanical tension. Within muscle fibers, there are some proteins that are sensitive to tension and get deformed by it. Researchers call them mechanosensors. When these mechanosensors deform, their new shape reacts with other molecules inside the muscle cell, triggering a complex molecular cascade that ends with the construction of new muscle tissue from amino acids taken from food. Now, it's important to point out that this process is still poorly understood. It's not known exactly which proteins act as mechanosensors or how they do it, and the molecular cascade they trigger is not entirely mapped out. Some aspect or byproduct of fatigue likely plays a role in amplifying the muscle building signal initiated by tension. Also, besides lifting heavy weights, other factors such as the cellular stretch caused by a muscle pump or just simply stretching a muscle for prolonged periods of time may also be able to affect mechanosensors enough to kickstart the construction of some new muscle tissue. But what is clear is that the tension produced by lifting weights is by far the most important initiator of the molecular cascade that ends in muscle protein synthesis.
Oh, please. Mechanosensors, molecular cascades, protein synthesis. Fancy words don't build muscle, bro. Hard training does.
Yeah, obviously, you don't need to know any of this stuff to build muscle. If you simply apply a good workout routine and work hard in the gym, you can experience muscle growth without understanding why it works. So instead of talking about mechanosensors, molecular cascades, and protein synthesis, I could have just given you a list of exercises by now, some quick tips, and sent you on your way. And don't worry, we will show you some training routines later on. But the reason we wanted to start with an explanation of what causes muscle to grow is because this reveals a few lessons that you would benefit immensely from adopting as the foundation of your training philosophy. So, here's Jeff with lesson number 1.
Don't chase sensations in the muscle, chase progress. If you pay attention to people training in commercial gyms, you'll notice that many of them base their workouts around what feels like it's working. For example, many people are drawn to exercises that allow them to not only feel the target muscle, but also look at it at the same time. A friend will sometimes keep an eye on the muscle to make sure it can't escape growth. Other people are drawn to cables because they give this nice, smooth feeling, and others simply do whatever gets them the biggest pump, taking inspiration from the spirit animal of bodybuilding. Many people judge the effectiveness of a workout based on whether it gets them sore the next day. This usually means chasing the burn and taking the fact that you feel wrecked the day after as proof of a job well done. The thing all these people have in common is that they're all chasing feelings. Now, going by what feels to be working is understandable. It's natural to want immediate feedback that the work you're putting in is actually doing something. But the problem is that muscle soreness, pumps, aches, and burns are all poor indicators of growth. It's possible to feel absolutely wrecked after a workout that didn't actually make you much, if any, bigger, such as downhill running, wall climbing, or a cardio session on the rowing machine. It's also possible to see very little muscle growth even if you got a great pump by lifting light weights with short rest periods. The science supports this as well. Studies from Flan and colleagues and Damas and colleagues have shown that muscle aches and soreness are not only unnecessary for muscle growth, they can be counterproductive, because when there's a lot of muscle damage, a large part of growth is directed toward repairing damaged muscle tissue rather than building new muscle tissue. As for pump training, this 2019 study showed that lifting light weights with short rest periods will create short-term increases in muscle size for a few hours because of temporary fluid shifts. However, this doesn't necessarily correlate to more muscle fiber growth over time. We should be concerned with growing actual muscle tissue. We want to build size that doesn't deflate soon after you leave the gym. So, if you can't use muscle sensations to judge the effectiveness of your training, what should you use instead? The answer is actually very simple. Focus on making progress. Let's say you did 3 sets of 8 reps with 100 pounds on the bench press, and it provided enough tension to get the muscle building machinery going. As the muscle grows, it gets stronger, and eventually, that same 3 sets of 8 with 100 pounds will no longer provide enough tension to trigger new muscle growth. It's too easy for you now. So now you need to create more tension. You can do that by either adding more weight, for example, doing 3 sets of 8 with 105 pounds, doing more reps with the same weight, so doing 3 sets of 9 with 100 pounds, or doing an extra set. Every one of these counts as progress because every one of these increases tension. However, I recommend using them in this order. Your first progression choice should be adding weight to the bar or the machine while keeping reps the same. As long as you can do this, you're golden. Keep it up. If you increase the weight, but it causes you to miss some reps, that means it's time to switch to adding reps instead. Try adding 1 or 2 reps each week at the same weight, and once you return to the original number of reps, try increasing the weight again. This is what coaches call double progression. If you can't increase either the load or the reps, consider adding an extra set. Eventually, you'll be able to add some weight to at least one of those sets, and then you can return to your original number of sets again. Remember, the best way to ensure long-term muscle growth is to focus on making progress. Don't chase soreness, don't chase the pump, don't chase the burn, don't chase fatigue, chase progress. One of the single most helpful habits you can learn in the early stages of training is tracking your workouts. Every time you train, you should be writing down the exercises, the weights, the sets and reps, and other notes related to technique and effort can be helpful too, especially as you get more advanced. In every workout, your goal should be to beat the training log in some way. Try not to be one of those people that chooses weights at random based on whatever you feel like that day. That'll only get you so far. The weights you use and the number of sets and reps you do should almost always be decided by the training log. The way you record your training is up to you. You can use a workout app, the notes app on your phone, a spreadsheet, or an old school notebook. Just don't keep it in your head. Write it down. The act of tracking your workouts not only makes sure that you don't forget what you did in between workouts, it can also increase your motivation and prove to yourself that you're actually serious about making progress.
Lesson 2. The best indicator of muscle growth is increased strength. When researchers isolate single muscle fibers and measure how much force they can produce, they find that the thickness of the fiber strongly predicts how much force it can generate. The relationship is very clear, nearly a straight line. The thicker the fiber, the more force it can produce. Whole muscle size also correlates with strength in trained athletes. This study by Brescio and Abbey tracked the lean body mass and performance of 20 elite male powerlifters, which included world and national champions, and found that the amount of weight they could lift on the squat, bench press and deadlift could be predicted to a high degree of accuracy by the amount of muscle mass the lifters had. Other studies that looked at Olympic weightlifters and rugby players found the same thing. The more jacked people were, the stronger they were on average. This correlation holds true for recreational lifters as well. When both trained and untrained people are asked to lift as much as they can on an exercise that requires no skill, such as leg extensions, the amount of weight they can lift strongly correlates with their muscle size. Is this surprising to you? Probably not. I mean, it's pretty intuitive that a bigger muscle is also a stronger muscle. If you see a guy who's jacked, you intuitively expect him to be strong too. But what is not intuitive to most people is that you can use strength as an indicator of whether you are succeeding or failing to build muscle. If you are succeeding to build muscle, you should be able to lift progressively heavier weights over time. This is assuming it's on the same exercise for the same number of reps and with the same lifting technique. On the other hand, if you are not able to lift progressively heavier weights over time, or at least do more reps with the same weight, you should take this as a warning sign that you are failing to grow, even if you are training consistently, getting pumps and experiencing soreness.
This of course doesn't mean that strength and size will always increase at a 1-to-1 ratio. In your first few months of lifting, strength typically increases faster than muscle does due to neurological changes and improved lifting technique. Similarly, experienced lifters can get stronger without gaining any new muscle mass if they practice a lift in a very low rep range and focus strictly on the skill aspect of lifting. But assuming you're following the fundamental principles of hypertrophy training, that we'll get to next, adding strength is the best indicator that you're adding muscle. This is a key point. To build maximum muscle naturally, especially as a new lifter, it's very important that you see your strength increase over time. Now, there are 6 main types of exercises that you should make progress on: a squat type movement, a hip hinge movement, a horizontal press, a vertical press, a horizontal pull, and a vertical pull. Different versions of these movements can be performed using barbells, dumbbells, or machines, and luckily, there are no must-do exercises for hypertrophy. You can pick and choose based on your preferences and your capabilities. With that said, I generally do recommend at least learning 6 fundamental lifts: the squat, deadlift, bench press, overhead press, pendlay row, and pull-ups or chin-ups. Making progress on these 6 exercises will make sure that you're gaining muscle across more or less your entire body. Again, it doesn't have to be exactly these 6, but I do think these are basic lifts that almost everyone has access to. And to give you some idea of how much strength you'd need to gain to indicate a 10-pound increase in muscle mass, here's an approximate guide for males. So you'd aim to increase your squat 6-rep max by around 70 pounds, or about 30 kilos, increase your deadlift 6-rep max by 80 pounds, or 35 kilos, and so on down the list. These strength increases should collectively indicate a 10-pound increase in total body muscle for the majority of lifters. And you can see the comparable figures for female lifters here, this time indicating a 5 to 6 pound increase in muscle mass rather than 10. For example, as a male, if you can currently bench press 100 pounds or 45 kilos for 6 reps, you should aim to increase your bench press to 155 pounds or 70 kilos for 6 reps. And if you can make all these improvements, I can almost guarantee you'll have put on 10 pounds of new muscle.
Now, there are some caveats that we need to mention here. First, these numbers will not be totally accurate. Depending on your bone structure, you may have to increase some lifts more than others. For example, if you have short arms, you may need to add a bit more weight to the bench press and overhead press compared to a guy with longer arms, but you may need to add a bit less for chin-ups and deadlifts. That's because short arms put you at an advantage on pushing exercises and at a disadvantage on pulling exercises. Second, these numbers may not fully account for the rapid increases in strength that are caused by other factors besides muscle growth when you're a beginner. In your first few months of lifting, strength increases much faster than muscle size. In fact, you can get stronger even without gaining any muscle. This is because in the early stage of training, most strength gains are caused by neural adaptations, improved lifting technique, and changes in connective tissues. Neural adaptations means that your nervous system becomes better at recruiting and coordinating the contraction of muscle fibers. Improved lifting technique means that you learn how to perform an exercise to achieve better leverages and more efficient movement patterns. And changes in connective tissues refers to increased tendon stiffness and enhanced capacity to transmit force laterally between the muscle fibers and its surrounding collagen layer. All these things allow you to move more weight without gaining any muscle. We try to account for these factors, but if in your case these early adaptations are particularly strong, you may need to add 5 to 10 kilograms more to your lifts than the numbers we've shown you. And finally, if other genetic factors give you above average natural ability for strength, you will need to add significantly more weight to the bar than the numbers we've shown you. It is possible to be unusually strong for your level of muscularity if your height and bone length give you good leverages, your muscles attached to bones further away from joints, you've got long and elastic tendons, you've got a high fast twitch to slow twitch muscle fiber ratio, and your nervous system can send action potentials to motor units at a higher rate than average. This is called rate coding. The fact that increased strength is the best indicator of muscle growth isn't useful in comparing two individuals to one another. It's only useful for assessing one individual's progress over time. But all things considered, these are good goals to have in the gym. If you want to gain 5 kilograms of muscle as a male beginner, you should aim to add 30 kilograms to your squat, 35 to your deadlift, 25 to your bench press, 15 to your overhead press, 20 to your pendlay row, and 15 to your chin-ups.
Lesson 3. Training will not maximize muscle growth if it doesn't provide enough tension or if it doesn't provide tension enough times. So, based on what I've told you so far, you may be thinking that building muscle is all about lifting weights as heavy as possible. But that's not quite right. To successfully stimulate muscle growth, your training must not only provide sufficient tension in terms of the loads you're using, but it must also provide that tension a sufficient number of times in the form of sets and reps. Both of these factors are needed. You need enough tension, and you need to apply that tension enough times. Okay, so your training will provide enough tension as long as you're pushing your sets close enough to muscular failure. You can think of muscular failure as the point where you can no longer do another rep with reasonably good technique. If you're getting within a few reps of that point, you're probably generating enough tension to maximize growth. But this partly depends on how heavy you're lifting. For example, if you select a weight so heavy that you can only lift it for 4 reps, that weight will produce a very high amount of tension from the very first rep because you need to recruit so many muscle fibers just to get the weight moving. On the other hand, if you select a weight so light that you can lift it for 20 reps, there won't be much tension at the beginning of the set at all. It isn't until you get closer and closer to failure that more and more muscle fibers are recruited until you eventually reach that same high level of tension. So let's say you pick a weight that you could do for 20 reps and you decide to stop at rep 12 because you start to feel that burning sensation. That set wouldn't provide enough tension to trigger very much muscle growth. To make sure that you're getting the maximum stimulus at this weight, you'd need to take the set closer to failure, ideally stopping at rep 18, 19, or 20. It's important to understand this so that you don't choose training styles that simply aren't heavy enough. For example, some people expect to build muscle by doing athletic circuit-style workouts. But if you can do 100 knee raises before hitting failure, doing 15 of them every 30 seconds won't grow your legs at all. There's simply not enough tension on the muscle. If you can do 30 kettlebell swings before hitting failure, doing 15 swings may get your heart rate up, it may burn a few calories, it may even feel challenging, but it isn't building muscle. If you can do 20 reps with a certain weight on the leg press, doing 8 reps with that same weight isn't building much muscle either. This is a very common mistake that a lot of new lifters make. They stop their sets at the first feeling of discomfort, and that's almost always too many reps away from failure to provide enough tension. Now, a good rule of thumb is to take most of your sets 1 to 3 reps shy of failure. Once you've got the technique figured out and have built a decent strength foundation, it is important to take some sets all the way to failure in order to learn what true failure feels like. Several studies have shown that beginners are, understandably, not very good at judging how close they are to failure and often underestimate it by 5 reps or more. I think this explains why so many people stop making progress fairly early on in their lifting career. They just aren't pushing their sets hard enough to get them past the newbie phase.
Now you might ask, well, if high tension is the goal, why not choose the heaviest weight I can handle, lift it once, and be done with it? Because that doesn't work either. In addition to subjecting muscle fibers to sufficient tension, you also need to do it a certain number of times in the form of reps and sets. For instance, a study by Mattox and colleagues found that a group that did 2 workouts a week, each consisting of 5 single max reps on the chest press machine, failed to build any significant amount of muscle over the course of 8 weeks. This is important to understand because when you track your lifts in the gym, it's easy to get tempted into increasing the weight on the bar at the expense of reps. On paper, that can appear as progress, yet if the number of reps per workout gets too low, you can actually create an inferior muscle building stimulus, despite having more weight on the bar. It's common for guys to get into this situation, especially on the bench press. A guy may start doing sets of 8 reps on the bench. Stuck at the same weight for a few weeks, he might decide to add 5 kilograms and drop the reps down to 6. Happy with his apparent strength gains, a few weeks later, he might add another 5 kilograms and drop the reps down to 4. Finally, impatient to join the 100 club, he might continue to increase the weight until the only way he can bench is with his body getting a bonus set of rows in the process. This is not good. You have to strike a balance between the weight on the bar or machine and the number of reps and sets you do per workout. A good way to do that is to set up your training program based on the following guidelines. Do around 9 to 12 sets per body part per week. So 9 to 12 for chest, 9 to 12 for back, 9 to 12 for quads, etc. Note that smaller muscle groups like biceps, triceps or rear delts only need 3 to 6 weekly sets because of overlap with compound lifts. Take all sets within 0 and 3 reps of failure. They need to be hard. Most of your sets should be done in the 6 to 12 rep range. This is called a medium rep range. So most of your bench press, squat or barbell row sets should be performed with a weight that makes you reach failure in the 6 to 12 rep range. Some of your sets can be done in the 1 to 5 rep range and 12 to 20 range. These are called low and high rep ranges. It can be beneficial to sometimes train the big compound lifts with heavy weights in a low rep range with a focus on strength progression. And the higher rep range can be advantageous for isolation exercises. Some people find that training smaller muscle groups with heavy weights leads to poor technique or joint pain. So it can be beneficial to do isolation exercises such as biceps curls, triceps extensions, lateral raises, leg extensions or cable flies with lighter weights that make you reach failure in the 12 to 20 rep range. And finally, distribute those sets over 1 to 3 workouts per week. So for example, you can do all your weekly bench press sets in a single workout, 2 workouts or 3 workouts, depending on your preferences and schedule. If you set up your training routine based on these guidelines, you're on the right track.
So with this foundation in place, here are some sample routines that you can use in the gym right away. And you can pause the video or take a screenshot if you want to have a closer look. This is a sample full body split that you can run 3 days a week. This is a sample upper lower split you can run 4 days a week. And this is a modified body part split or modified bro split that you can run 5 days a week. Now, if you're wondering which of these is the best or which one you should use, the answer is it doesn't really matter. Each split has its own advantages and disadvantages, but I do think that all 3 of these would produce very similar results as long as they're applied consistently. That's the key, just progressing through the workouts consistently. For this reason, the split that'll work best for you is the one that best fits your schedule and personal preference.
As for tracking workouts, since my workout app hasn't been updated in years and Jeff's workout app is not out yet, we recommend using the Notes app on your phone. You can do a separate note for each workout, list the number of exercises you need to do, list the number of sets and reps, and list how close you got to failure on each set. As you do the sets, you can check them off and update last week's numbers with what you did today. Lastly, you can write a note for each exercise to remind yourself what to aim for next time. For example, you can write, next time add 2.5 kilograms to all sets, or add a rep to set 1 and 2, or improve technique on set 3, or keep the reps the same. You'll be surprised what a difference that makes. Your notes give you a goal for each workout and ensure that you're not choosing weights and reps at random. Alright, this is the end of part 1. In part 2 of this video, which I'll release in a few weeks, Jeff and I will cover the nutrition side of building your first 5 kilograms of muscle. So if you aren't subscribed already, make sure you do that so you don't miss it. And if you're looking to put all the information we covered here into an actionable plan that you can just go into the gym and execute, there are 2 programs I recommend. If your goal is to gain muscle and weight, I recommend getting Jeff's Fundamentals Hypertrophy program. It comes with 3 separate programs for you to use to go from skinny to muscular in your first year of training. I've put an affiliate link for it in the description. And if your goal is to gain muscle while losing weight, I recommend enrolling into my Shred Smart program. In addition to giving you clear training routines, Shred Smart shows you how to eat to create muscle definition and get 6-pack abs. I've also linked it in the description. Thanks again for watching the video, and we will see you in the next one.